Hi everybody, I'm going to be presenting on Bob Dylan and his album Highway 61 Revisited, which was an influential album from the transition from Bob Dylan's famous folk music to rock music. So as we know from class, Bob Dylan was considered the voice of a generation. And his birth name was Robert Allen Zimmerman. He later changed his name to Bob Dylan because it rolled off the tongue easier. He was born in Duluth, Minnesota on May 24th, 1941, before moving to Hibbing, Minnesota, where he taught himself how to play music. So in high school, he created a band called the Golden Chords with his buddies, which was a rock and roll band. He graduated from high school in 1959 and attended college at the University of Minnesota as an art major, where he kind of took off his music career. So he began playing folk music and was completely influenced by folk singers like Woody Guthrie over on the left and Hank Williams for their authentic and rustic sound and their ability to appeal to the common American. So in 1960, he took a trip to Denver where he met Jesse Fuller, who taught him how to have the harmonica rod where he could play the harmonica and the guitar at the same time. So he dropped out of college in 1961 and then traveled to New York City to Greenwich Village, where the folk community was stationed. And there he met John Hammond with Columbia Records, and there his popularity took off. So Bob Dylan's folk music was very influential, mainly because he was notorious for writing his own music on the spot, and he wasn't concerned about how he thought society would care how it sounded. He just kind of wrote it. He tried to be as authentic as possible and wrote protest songs, which appealed to many young Americans in the 1960s. And as we know, the Students for a Democratic Society kind of latched onto the theme from his music. And he appealed to the average American, very much like his predecessors Woody Guthrie and Hank Williams. But in 1965, actually his popularity kind of spiked also in 1963, where he performed at the Newport Folk Festival. But in 1965, things started to change for him. He decided to transition to more of an electric sound with his album Highway 61 Revisited. And with his transition to rock in 1965, he decided to add more of an electric guitar sound, and his fans were not supportive at all. He actually got booed off the stage quite often. Which kind of happened in 1965 after he returned from a tour in England, where he had added electric sounds. And he has this famous quote, "It's very tiring having other people tell you how much they dig you if you yourself don't dig you." So he didn't like how his folk music was sounding. So on August 30th, 1965, he wrote Highway 61 Revisited with the three major songs Like a Rolling Stone, Tombstone Blues, and Desolation Row. And Like a Rolling Stone was actually the longest song to air on radio at the time and became the #2 hit for 1965. So Highway 61 Revisited, Like a Rolling Stone is the biggest song. And the famous lyrics are, "Once upon a time you dressed so fine, through the bums a dime in your prime, didn't you?" Then he goes on to ask, "How does it feel? How does it feel to be without a home, like a complete unknown, and like a rolling stone?" So the implications of this song is Bob Dylan is pointing out the hypocrisy of the upper level of society. He's writing a scathing review of upper society members and their inability to empathize and to notice the lower class of society, which is living a miserable life. So he's kind of making himself one with them. His second song, Tombstone Blues, has the famous quote, "Now I wish I could write you a melody so plain that would hold you, dear lady, from going insane, that could seize you and cool you and seize the pain of your useless and pointless knowledge." And then he goes on to describe the living conditions for poor people. So here he's implying that he's one with the lower American, or with the average American, and he's highlighting the poverty against the systematic government, which is so concerned about intellectual knowledge and aren't paying attention to the lower members of society. His third song is Desolation Row, where he writes, most famously the bottom here, "Then they'll kill him with self-confidence after poisoning him with words." And by this he means basically that society is so concerned, kind of like the earlier song, with intellectual knowledge that they're not paying attention to who's all really taking part in society. And Desolation Row actually means a place where misfits of society go and kind of collaborate against the establishment of the government. So basically this was happening in the 1960s, actually 1965, and that year began with the assassination of Malcolm X in February, and then was followed by Martin Luther King Jr.'s march from Selma to Montgomery. So obviously this was instrumental in the middle of the civil rights movement. And it also came at the time where the heightening of the Vietnam War was taking place. In May, the University of California, Berkeley students burnt draft cards, and then President Johnson announced in the summer they were going to be increasing the amount of troops, and then the Voting Rights Act was passed in the same month that Highway 61 Revisited was released. And Highway 61 was important to Bob Dylan because it connected his hometown, Duluth, Minnesota, to the lower beings of the South, New Orleans, which was obviously in the lower, more poor parts of society. So Bob Dylan tried to reach out to the lower aspects of society with his rock music that had transformed from folk music. So thanks. Bye.